My D&D group started a new campaign that takes place in an urban medieval city called Camorra. This city has cobblestone streets, canals, bridges, and tall medieval buildings, but to start I need a piece of terrain that is classic, simple, reusable, and will help set the tone for our new campaign. That's the goal. Let's make it happen, and thanks for tuning in again to Tabletop Forge. The plan is to take a 2-foot by 2-foot foam board from Home Depot and turn it into a city board with a cobblestone street, some pavers, some texture, some potholes, and make it a good foundation for all of the terrain that we're going to set up for our city campaign. I'm going to start by taking some old Sculpey and trying to reconstitute it by twisting it up and folding it up and rolling it out, and then I'll use a textured roller to turn it into a cobblestone street. You can buy these textured rollers online, but I actually 3D printed this one, and it's pretty easy to use once you get a little bit of practice. I cut up some sections that look nice, and I put them on a baking tray and baked them in the oven. When they were done, I started laying them out on the foam board and trimming them up so that they would fit together. I set this up so that the main path would go straight across the middle of the board, but I also made a separate piece out of some old air-dry clay that branches off into a 3-way intersection. Once I have it laid out just the way I want it, I glue it down with some PVA glue. For the gaps where the different pieces of road meet, I fill those in with some old air-dry clay, and then I use a sculpting tool to kind of blend it in and sculpt the bricks to help the pieces fit together. Once the cobblestone streets are done, I start cutting some bricks and laying them down with some PVA glue. I'm using these first bricks as a sort of border to go around the cobblestone streets that were made out of clay, and they're going to help blend the clay stones I have on the streets with the foam stones that I'm going to add to the rest of the board. I'm going to need a ton of these little square stones to cover the rest of the board, so I take some foam, I cut into these long kind of rectangular strips, and then I stack them up and I slice them to create all these little individual bricks. Once I have a bunch of them cut, I put them in this little container with a bunch of rocks, and I shake it all up to break them up and to give them a little bit of natural texture. It is time to start laying some serious bricks. I dip each brick into a little bit of white glue, I stick it on the board, and I keep moving. In this new D&D campaign, we are taking turns as the Dungeon Master and attempting to weave a narrative together as a group. The general premise is that our characters are all in massive debt for different reasons, and we're trying to pull heists and other jobs for the crime lords that are called kappas in order to pay off this debt. I'm third in line to be the Dungeon Master. We rolled randomly for this. and I'm already planning my heist and special terrain build for it. I'm also building and painting things for the rest of the group when it's their turn to run a session. This is our first time running a campaign like this, but it's pretty exciting, and I'll make sure to report on how it goes. After I repeat the same process on the other side of the streets, I need to start filling in the little gaps. So I just take some bricks, I slice them into shape, and I glue them individually into place. It definitely takes some time, but I love the finished look. I broke it up into some parts so I didn't have to sit there and lay all the bricks at once. I cut out some circles for some sewer grates to go in, and left a few bricks missing here and there for some variety. Up next is time for some black paint and Mod Podge. I start laying down the base coat, but then I quickly realize I forgot a step. I need to texture up these bricks. So I grab some tin foil and start pressing it into all the bricks to create some stone texture, and even go back over the area that I already painted a little bit. Once that dries, it's time to lay down some color. We're going to keep this paint job pretty simple. First a regular gray, then a light gray, and finish it off with a khaki. I'm going to dry brush all these colors to kind of pick up all the details and texture from the stone. To add a little visual variety, I covered the road in a little bit of watered down orangish brown paint. I also went over it with the dry brush of the grays and the khaki to help kind of tie everything back together. That way it can add some variety but also blend in with the rest of the piece. This khaki color is like my favorite final dry brush color to put on every terrain piece. It adds kind of a lighter highlight but also a little bit of color and warmness. It's one of my favorite colors and I use it on basically everything. I 3D printed a few sewer grates and I painted them with some metallic and some rusty colors, and I just glued them into place. For this last step, I'm going to use some coconut fiber. This is kind of like the stuff you would see for in potting soil to grow plants. But if you take it and sift out all the big pieces and you add a bunch of water to it, it makes this interesting kind of ground cover that you can use to kind of fill in gaps and imply some grime or dead leaves or whatever. I first saw this technique from another YouTuber called Devs and Dice, and I wanted to give it a try. I love the kind of contrast and color it adds, as well as being like not a grout, but something that fills the gaps. This is my first time using it, and I feel like it worked best when I mashed it in with my fingers into all the cracks and crevices, and then I used a big brush to sort of sweep away the excess. Once this is done, all that really remains is to seal it all in with some white glue. I just take a spray bottle with some water and some glue, and I coat the whole thing. This is the first build for our urban cityscape campaign. I'm very excited to show you some builds coming up next, but for now, let's see the final product. that is a wrap. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, this is the first in our series of medieval urban builds that I'm making. And up next, you may have seen some houses there. I'm going to build those. And then I have a special build for the session where I'm going to be the dungeon master. Very excited to show you that. But you got to stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll catch you next time on Tabletop Forge.